Continuing on. 1949, Tuesday, 19th of January, 2021. Okay, further moving along with a few more intricate details in regards to my time at Mile Lane Nursery in 93/94, I'll say more, 94, to 1997. First and foremost, carrying on from yesterday, I meant to say about the forklift. The forklift would carry peat, would get peat off the Arctic lorries as well, because the Arctic couldn't get in. He would, the peat came in like huge white sacks on pallets, and he would keep, by the way, the peat down the bottom. I'd burn the rubbish here, he'd kind of like keep the peat around there, around the side. Sometimes he'd keep it down there as well. I meant to say yesterday in regards to the shed as well. This shed was always full to the brim of old style trays. Trays that basically were broken off, damaged, chipped. It was full to the brim of them. If you ever needed a certain type of tray, if you needed a tray for like other plants, there would be, numerically that is, different types of holding trays there. Sometimes it would be the huge 4 trays, the standard 6, but sometimes you'd get, when the plants were smaller, you'd get kind of like 8 whole trays. And what you'd also find sometimes as well is that when he would buy house plants in from Holland, if they were like a hell of a lot smaller, they'd sometimes come in hulls of 16, if I remember rightly. And they were piled to the brim in the shed, but this shed was never used for anything but a dumping ground, more than anything. I meant to say that yesterday. I also meant to say, which I nearly forgot, is the office. There's a big one. I was reprimanded in there quite a few times. I think in the end, I ended up getting a final written warning. And it wasn't for bad behaviour or anything, it was just the most stupid of things. But, you know, these are the types of people that they were. George and Anchor, they were slave drivers. They came across as fair, but they were just, it would be the most petty of things. And I think you'll find in my time there, I wasn't trouble or anything. I was an extremely hard worker. Comical on break times, and that was round about May. And that's it. But the office, I meant to say, were between the green shed and the house, which would be here. It's like it was like a block, and it was onto the back of the garage, almost like to the side between hand there. And you knew that if you got called into the office, you were in trouble. Or otherwise you would never be called in. You'd always see George on the phone here, scrounging for orders. Preston, Newcastle, Manchester, Edinburgh, and so forward. And obviously you were never allowed in there whatsoever. In fact, you were never allowed in there for anything except to be reprimanded. I had my interview in there, as did everybody. So, moving on, slightly more detail. As always, I've missed something in regards to yesterday. Yeah, he'd always be messing around with the lorry. He'd always have like the head up. He'd be messing around with the mechanics of it consistently. He was the biggest tight arse known to man. Mr. Scrooge, literally. If you actually look on Google, you can actually see it parked up saying Mile Lane Nurseries. And where you see it on Google is actually where he used to keep it all the time. There's not much more space from what I remember to have kept it. So moving on into a little bit more layout in regards to the greenhouses and what was in. Obviously there's going to be a few more videos because I've run out of space in regards to drawing wise, and there's no point in flipping the pages. I might as well just kind of like get it done page by page as such. So getting into greenhouse 1. So obviously greenhouse 1 was here, which was Mark Armstrong's greenhouse. This one here. So you would go into the sliding door here. So slide there, slid to the left. Now to your left would be lower benches. They would literally only be like a foot, maybe 2 foot off the ground, and cleaning them was hell on a stick because you'd have to bend down and your ass would be in the air, literally, in essence. It was always great because when Sharon was cleaning these benches, me and Mark were always kind of like nearby watching her bend over. You don't believe me, ask him. It sounds perverse, but it's not. This is how men are at work. And that's just life, isn't it? And she'd wear these kind of like tight black cycling shorts. So the lower benches would be down here. I think there was about 3 of them. Could have been 4. I forget. But as I've put here, these lines here were wooden panels. Because as the lower benches went here, this all of a sudden got about 2 or 3 foot higher. And the panels went obviously from the bench to the top of the greenhouse. So you would think in retrospect, well, this part would be higher up than this part. Well, actually, no, it wasn't, in essence, was it? It's all the same level. It's just the benches are lower down. And the panels support the top of these 5. I'm more than positive there was 5 benches. So as you would look to your left, the lower benches were there. Medium benches, not medium, other benches were there. I'm more than positive they extended past the lower benches. I'm sure the lower benches only went up to here, but I'm sure the other 5 that were higher up went further along. But you'd have to ask Mark Armstrong about that. He'd let you know in on that. So as you get to the wooden panels here, just around here was a red box, which they kept a telephone in for when orders and people used to ring up. And that was on like, it was like a cream phone, cream corded phone. And sometimes you would have to answer it when George was away and Anne was down the bottom greenhouse. And obviously you'd have to mail in nursery. And then you'd have to go and obviously get Anne. Sometimes Paul, who was obviously the supervisor, he may sometimes, although very rare from what I can remember, took orders. But sometimes he would take orders from local shops like Jane and other people. They would come in and buy houseplants off George. He would take those types of orders, but the main orders, Anne and George would go up to the office to take the orders. So as you saw, this was about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. This red box here with the telephone in. But before you got to there, if you took a right, there'd be a tap here, like an open tap, about 3 feet off the ground. And there would be a tap there. We would always, without fail, when it was tea time or lunch, you would always have to clean your hands. Not because somebody told you, but you had so much peat and crap and chemical and dirt on your hands. If you didn't clean your hands, well, that was it, more or less for you. Infected cheese pickle sandwich and deadly diseases for the rest of your life. So we would always banter around these two taps here, and that's that one and that one. So as you turned right into that, these are supposed to be flowers, by the way. You got to remember, there would be thousands of flowers, not just hundreds, thousands. If you turn right in there, the tap was there, you'd have benches there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. But what would happen is that the benches would be split in half. So when you was working with a partner, or you working, they would work that side and you would work that side. And if you were laying out plants or collecting plants, sometimes they'd be ahead of you or you'd be ahead of them. Especially when we were laying out plants, park the trolley about there or there, and we would use the trolley to go backwards and forwards. As you can see, these trolleys here, if you would be able to put 4 white trays, normally azaleas, which would carry 6 in the white tray, you would put 4 trays on the trolley, and a lot of the time you would go head first. In other words, you would push your trolley. You wouldn't drag it, you would push it, because you had all this space here. But when you got to about here and you were laying out plants, on your next time round you'd have to drag the trolley so you'd be able to get right to the end, and then you'd push it out. And these things were a nightmare, because you'd constantly, if you didn't watch what you were doing, would hit the lower corners by banging into them. And it was the most annoying, treacherous, ridiculous thing when you would hit those corners if you didn't push the trolley straight, as anybody would tell you. So the trolley bracket, that's what the trolley bracket looked like. It had like 2 metal adjacent panels and would have wheels either side. But this would only ever be used on this trolley in Greenhouse 2, because that was the only one with sliding benches. Because this bracket is designed to basically go either side of the benches, because the wheels basically roll along, or used to roll along the bench, so you didn't have to worry about, as I said here, hitting the benches. You didn't have to worry about that. It's because the wheels took care of it for you, and you could just push and pull to your heart's content. So that was the bracket there. As I've said, it was only used in Greenhouse 2 due to the wheels and the benches. You would take them off for the other benches in the other greenhouses. And obviously Greenhouse 1 and 3 had asbestos for benches. So Greenhouse 1 here and Greenhouse 3, Greenhouse 2 didn't have asbestos, and I'm more than positive Greenhouse 4 didn't. But Greenhouse 1, especially the lower benches, and Greenhouse 3, those benches were asbestos. And if that asbestos broke off, which it used to commonly do, we'd breathe that stuff in all the time. And he knew it was dangerous. Even then he knew it was dangerous. But he wouldn't replace, the cheapskate he would not replace those benches. There's actually compensation claims going through at the minute for employers in the past who made their employers work with asbestos. Oh yeah, yeah. From what I understand, they're going through now as we speak. I'm considering, but we'll take it as it goes, or comes, should I say. So, yeah, they'd be primarily lower down, holding the benches up with like breeze blocks, and underneath was like a brown clay, earthy soil substance. This was a nightmare. It was under kind of like these benches under greenhouse 1 and under greenhouse 1, under greenhouse 3, and at greenhouse 4, and it was greenhouse 3 where is the pod burst and got in my eye, and I had to go to A&E because literally I just could not get it out of my eye. It's one of these bursting pods full of bacteria, and it got in my eye, made all my eye red, and I kept on rubbing it, and it was making it worse, and that's what scarred my left eye originally, which is why I've got eyesight problems in my left eye. I can still see, it's it's blurred, and it's blurred because of that moment in greenhouse 3 when I was cleaning underneath the benches. The brown clay substance, amongst the brown clay, we used to like grow weeds and pods and stuff, and I pulled out one, and like a white pod shot straight into my eye. I think that's why I'm paranoid about the goddamn sweet corn in the pan these days, and it shooting out at me. It's because it was traumatic. That I'll never forget that. Never forget it. And because I kept on rubbing it, and they didn't kind of like know what it was at the time. And obviously I explained, and my eye was red for weeks because of that incident. And it couldn't have been prevented. It was just a 1 in a million chance that the white pod shot out and got into my left eye. Which is why it's scarred to this day. So, yeah, there's a earthy, it was like a clay substance. It was absolutely disgusting. Because obviously when you'd water the benches, it would get underneath and the water would set on the brown clay and would just sit there. And it was really had nowhere to go in terms of drainage. So it would just sit there and gather bacteria and weed, really. By the way, yeah, the windows to the greenhouses were white sprayed out. They were white sprayed out basically because of the sun. In blocking the sun out, but not the roof. Not the roof in the glass in the greenhouse above. They weren't sprayed out, from what I can remember, but the sides were, and and this was for all of the greenhouses. Were sprayed out white and had like bubble wrap, from what I can remember. So it was like a white spray, and then it had the bubble wrap on top. That's why you could never see. You could see a dark shadow of somebody coming down the sides, but that would be about it. And the white spray and the bubble wrap would not so much only keep the heat in, but it would keep obviously the sun from away from certain plants. I think that was the reason anyway. Yeah, that so the red box was there with the telephone on. It had a long cord, white cord. Sometimes you'd have to answer it when George was away and Anne was staking. Yeah, the hose piping. The hose piping was yellow. Important memory that. What colour was the hose piping? Yellow. And you'd have to kind of like stick. We used to have these kind of like long when you were watering, and you'd have to put that obviously into the yellow pipe. And near this tap, Mark would keep his Wellingtons. Yeah. So that's greenhouse 1. The plants. So around the side here, on this very end, would be bubble wrap. Now on the other side of this was greenhouse 2. And there was white concrete like base blocks at the bottom, so that when you pulled this up, it was a double nightmare. It's because they kind of like stuck out a bit, and it would be a lot of the time easier up to about there was to just carry rather than do anything else. So the bubble wrap was here, which is what separated the greenhouse. But as I've said before, you'd hear conversations going on in here, and they would hear conversations going on there, but yeah, it would be blotted out with the bubble wrap. You'd forget people were on the other side, so when you were being slagged off, you'd hear everything, and vice versa. Yeah, I just want to talk about that a bit more. The 3 different types of trolleys. There was one trolley that would be 4 high, that you would, I think you could get about 6 trays. And on the bottom, there was 2 wheels, only 2, not 4, just 2. So by default, the trolley in itself, this type of trolley, would seesaw one way or the other, depending on which way you pushed it. And the mechanics of it literally is designed for it to kind of like levitate with the weight, from what I remember, of how you pushed it. And the kid that came to work at Mile Initial called Gary, he could never push them straight, and it was always hilarious. We'd take the piss out of him because he just couldn't. He'd be banging into stuff and he just couldn't push the things. So it's not like you needed great technique. It's just you needed to be mindful of how you pushed and pulled in regards to the weight. So it'd either go that way or it would go that way. So you would get 2 trays on the bottom there, and what would happen is people like John, Canadian John, he used to complain that when I would fill the trolleys when we were doing the potting, that I would put the middle tray vertical rather than horizontal. Now these 2 either side here would go vertical, but he would bitch when I would put the middle one horizontal as well. And he always used to complain because it was a fucker to pull out, when really in essence the middle one you had to put horizontal. But I could never be asked when you're in a rush, when you're potting when you're filling the trolleys from potting, and they'd have to go out in great numbers and fast, and you'd have to unload them fast. And obviously the oldie that he was, he really went at me one day. I think got a verbal warning off George for screaming at me. So that would be that trolley. That trolley was used for laying out and for collecting, for when plants had got white sleeves on them. We'd put them into trays, and then they'd go on this trolley into the shed for packing. Or likewise, we would pot and put them onto these trolleys, so they would go out to the greenhouses so they could be laid out. Number 2 is this trolley here. This was the one for the bracket, the one the bracket was used for. You could fit 4 on the top here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you would either push or you would pull it to get you up and down the benches. And you either used the bracket for Greenhouse 2 or you didn't. Trolley 3, these were, you could disassemble in a minute's notice. What would happen is we'd use these would be used for kind of like final delivery, and the plants would come on these trolleys. And I think you would find Belgium and Holland we would share the trolleys. They would take the trolleys back, they'd put them on in another country, and then they'd come back into our country, and we kind of like share the trolleys backwards and forwards. So you could fit many levels on depending on the size of the plant. Normally it was about 4, but sometimes on the smaller ones like campanulas, and when everything is just starting to get going, you could sometimes fit 5 or 6. And sometimes these things used to give me nightmares because they'd get stuck. You'd unhook them and you would have to kind of like take them off, disassemble them and put them together. And sometimes they'd just get stuck. It was just so laborious, it was unreal. But once you unhooked the shelves, you would have 4 metal posts. You could actually pull those 4 metal posts out and you'd have kind of like a base trolley here. Would piss around on the base trolley. But when the trolleys needed to go back, what would happen is these base trolleys with no poles or shelves in, what you'd do is you'd stack them about 5 high, and all the posts that you collected from the others, they would go in there and they would stick out. And pushing these things was a nightmare. Normally when you'd got them to that stage and you'd stack them there, they were to basically go back on the lorry for further travel. Yeah, sometimes the poles would get stuck in the corner. You'd have one awkward one. You'd have to go and get the hammer and hammer away at the base, because sometimes they'd be buckled and you'd have to hammer away at the base to get one of the poles out. Alright, where are we? Right, so moving on to the packing shed. Obviously my drawing is ridiculous, so I should have made this this bigger. But what would happen is, this would be the sliding door here. You would stack the boxes 4 high into various columns. Now when we were doing the packing, the potting machine would be left here. I would make boxes, stack them all up here. I would actually make them through the gas compressor gun. That's my ridiculous attempt at a gas compressor gun. It's like a handle at a gas pipe onto the evil one. I used to call it the evil one because basically it was so dysfunctional and only decided to work when it wanted to. And without the gas, you could not put the staples in the actual gun in itself, so you couldn't construct the boxes. So what they would do is they would come in on trolleys. This was the packing table here, this was the door here, this was the packing table, and they'd be put into like like 4 boxes. I would make the boxes here when they weren't stacked up and had plants in, obviously. I would put 4 boxes down. They would pack the flowers and mix them. This was the mixing table, and put them in. What I would do is I would take the gun, staple them up, and start stacking them 4 high there. So it'd be 4, 4, four, and there'd be about 10 rows. And obviously on a busy day it would go up to about there. So right there. So there'd be 4 high. It'd go back about 10 rows back. And on a busy day it'd be about 6 or 7 across. And then when they'd be packed in boxes, they would be ready to be put on trolleys, to be wheeled on, obviously, to the lorry there. So once the stapling was done, they'd be put there, stacked high, then put on trolleys and so forth. On another occasion, when we wasn't packing, the packing shed was used not only for the potting shed, but in the bottom right corner here, this was Alistair Stubbs's playing machine. When I first joined Mile Nursery, if I remember rightly, they didn't have the mixer. And the mixer was this big silver contraption, looked like something out of a Dr. Death horror novel. You'd open, it would face that way. Now you can remember is that when you were doing the potting machine would be facing that way, and this would be a little bit more over here. The table would be undone, and Al would come in here and he would constantly be mixing peat and chemicals and everything. And the peat and the chemicals is basically as you needed the right alkaline, the right substance, the right elements, everything. But once it was prepared and it was fully mixed, when the potting machine was here, he would the peat would pour out, and he'd have a wheelbarrow and he'd move it to here, and he would hand shovel the peat in. As I stood there, George stood there, and we potted the machines. We potted the plants. As he potted the plants round that way. As he potted them round that way. Oh no, sorry, he potted them that way. And they came round to me here, and I used to have to collect them here to put on the trolley here. And George would have to stop the machine, that if I wasn't fast enough, they'd go back into the peat that would be falling here, that would fill the actual pots. So that's really, really important, the exact process of what... now, I was consistently called to the potting machine is because... Why? It's because I was fast. I was fast because I could get that as they came round, I would fill a tray before it even got to this corner here. Whereas the older guys and everything, they'd be like, the trays would be down here and almost ready to go back, and George would have to stop. So the older people, he wouldn't put on the potting machine, basically because they weren't young and fit. And obviously then I was young and fit, and I was quick as well. And that's what he liked about me, is that I was efficient at what I did. A bit like my mentality to this very day. So, and that would be the entrance, and that entrance there would go into a greenhouse 2. So you would have the potting machine, you would have the mixer, you would have the mixing table, and you would have the gas pressure stapler, which would be here next to the door, and I would have to make boxes here. And then when I would make them, I would put 4 down, they would mix the flowers, put them in, I would staple them back up, and then start stacking them adjacently and accordingly and neatly, ready for transport. Simple as, really. Right, I'm running out of space again, so I'm going to have to call it there. Jeffrey Thomas Heathcote, born 25th of August 1976, here at Millhouse Mill Lane, Wellington, Telford, Shropshire, Tango Foxtrot 1, 1 Papa Romeo.